Hello and welcome into episode 2 of No Face, No Case, where we don't judge the players by the names, but by the stats they produce. My name's Shanholz, and in the last episode we did the quarterbacks, so now we're just moving right down the list with the running backs. The three running backs in this list do differ compared to the first episode because one of these running backs is getting drafted over 10 ADPs higher than the other two. So I don't know if you can tell from the stats or not, but that's what we're here to find out. So without wasting any more time, let's just jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to look at, of course, is the player's profile. This is just basically their physicals as well as where they went to high school rating, collegiate Power 5 school, or the Pro Bowl selection. We have all that on this slide. And we do red for contestant 1, blue for contestant 2, and yellow for contestant 3, just to keep them all the stats in the same category for them, or under the same person, But going into contestant 1 here in red, this is going to be our youngest out of the three, I believe, at 24 years of age. Little on the shorter side of 5'9", but has the muscle body mass at 215. Coming out of high school as a 4-star recruit. Yes to the Power 5 conference, but doesn't have a Pro Bowl selection. So from the stats here, we personally can't tell if this guy got it done in a professional level or not with the 0 Pro Bowl selections. But high school and Power 5 conference, check off both my lists as far as this running back in particular. Going on to blue and contestant 2, this is the middle child again. Just like the last episode, the middle child is blue, 25 years of age. This is a bigger running back at 6 foot 230. I couldn't find anything on this particular running back's 24/7 composite score, which is how I do my high school recruit statistics. So I put NA, and I'm assuming that has to do with the fact that he could only make it at a JUCO level to begin with, but he eventually transferred into a Power 5 conference. That's where the JUCO/YES comes in. So this guy did show at a collegiate level he could play at a Power 5 conference school. And then the Pro Bowl selections is 0. So both of these running backs do not have a Pro Bowl under their belt, unfortunately. But that changes with contestant 3 in yellow. This is going to be our oldest contestant, I think, on both of the shows so far at age 28. He is the biggest of the backs at 6'1", 233. Coming out of high school, he was a mid-tier player with a 3-star. Yes to the Power 5 conference. And this guy has 2 Pro Bowl selections, so a multiple Pro Bowl selected running backs. This guy's got it done professionally more than the other 2 in their careers as of right now. And then that brings us into the career fantasy finishes. This is just where they fell as far as their actual rankings per year in their career. And these are running backs, so I will give you a standard and a PPR rank for all 3 of these players. And contestant 1 has played a total of 3 seasons, so a rather young back. He's also 24 years of age. But going into the stats, 2020, his rookie year, he finished standard 20 and PPR 18. 2021, standard 24 and PPR 15. And the last season that we just currently had, he is standard 23 and PPR 21. What the stats show me strictly on paper, just looking at this is going to be a receiving back. Every single PPR has been higher than the standard. So he gets his points more on the catches and like the yards and receptions and stuff compared to the standard. That's pretty much the only difference between standard and PPR is you get points per catch. Points per reception is the actual title. So this guy obviously has more catches than other running backs if his PPR is higher than the standard. So that's something to look at if you're just looking purely based on their statistical career. And the same could be said with this contestant. He has played 2 seasons, but remember he is also 25 years old. So less seasons and older than contestant 1. Going into his 2021 rookie year, he is standard 37 and PPR 47. But then coming off of last year, monstrous jump all the way to standard running back 14 and PPR running back 7. That is a monstrous jump. Looking at the stats here, if I'm going to, try to put the pieces together of this puzzle, I'm going to say that he was the back half of a backfield committee his rookie year. Anything higher than RB30 for me is kind of stay away territory. But then the monstrous jump to his sophomore year only suggests to me that it was a breakout season. And you can't tell because there's not enough data here to support this hypothesis. But it looks like with a 40-spot jump in the PPR range, I would take that for sure. Even if this running back falls back 8 spaces, that's still going to set him in PPR RB15. So I would take that for sure if that's going to be the standard that this running back sets in his career. Granted, he's only had 2 seasons, so you don't know if this particular season on paper is a breakout season or just a statistical outlier. And then going into contestant 3, This is our oldest participant with 6 seasons under his belt. The rookie stats I would pretty much toss out. I feel like they're a statistical outlier here. None of the other stats are replicable with this rookie season, so you can just go ahead and toss them out. I'm not really going to pay attention to those. But you also, it's hard to pay attention to the 2 top 10 performances here. Again, this is a 2-time Pro Bowl selected running back, and I'm assuming based on the stats, these are the 2 years that he was in the Pro Bowl. And then the other 3 years is kind of between PPR 19 all the way up to PPR 33. So that's between a mid-tier RB2 to like a low-tier RB3. You're probably going to get in between those where he's going to be drafted. If I'm just looking at paper, no name attached, of course, this is going to be – you're probably going to draft this guy around the standard 20 to PPR 19 like his last season, because that seems to be the median of where all these stats tend to go. 2 top 10 performances and 2 finishes outside the top 24. It's hard to put this guy in a box. So I would just picture this guy at the end. I'd picture him around you're going to be drafting him at ADP around running back 20-ish is where I'd say this guy's going to. And then going into the career stats, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this. This is where all the stats come into play, and we get to see exactly how good these guys are on paper. Contestant 1 has played 40 games with 3 seasons under his belt. That gives you a 13.3 games per season. So this guy's going to miss a few games for you, which is the case with most of these running backs. They're always going to have some type of injury eventually in their career that's going to miss a couple games. So you kind of want a running back that's going to give you time on the field besides the time off of it. I like my players. I don't know about you guys, but I like my players on the field producing. But then going into the stats, you hate to see the 9 attempts per game here. That just goes to show you that he is the backside of a running back committee. Anything 10 or under for me screams committee. And 10 and under especially is the backside, the RB2 basically of the running back committee. This guy's just going to be a spot-like player. He's going to be the receiving back because we know this guy's a good pass catcher based on his career finishes. So I'm thinking this guy's mostly just coming in for the passing via the stats so far is what I'm seeing. But the yards per attempt and the yards per game is pretty decent. 4.6 is about league average, maybe a tad higher. And then 42 yards per game. With the receiving upside for this guy, you'll take the 42 yards per game, but it's not your favorite. And this is where I like him as far as the touchdowns. He almost scores a touchdown every 2 games, which is a very good clip. If you're going to give me a touchdown between every 2 games, I'm going to take it 9 out of 10 days. And then coming down to the 20-plus yard runs with 7. That's 2% of his attempts. The highest in the league was Nick Chubb with 13 total. So you'll take 7. There's not much to say about that. Just throw that in there to show his big run ability. But then the receiving is really where this guy shines for me. 4 catches per game is very good rate. That's if you play PPR, that's just 4 free points for you right there, just right off the rip for him. Getting into his yards, 7.7 yards per catch is pretty good out of the backfield, and 30 yards per game. If you add that with the rushing for over his career, he gives you 72 yards per game, which is good. That's 3/4 of the way to 100. I'll take that for sure. And then coming up with the touchdowns here, it was 7 in the air. That's 4.5% of his catches, so approximately 1 in every 20 catches is going to get you in the end zone, which is not a bad rate for a running back. And then the big play potential in the air for this guy, he has 9 20-plus yard catches, which is more than his runs, which is kind of unusual for a running back, but 5.8% of his catches go for big yards. Okay, then coming up with contestant 2, remember 2 seasons, age 25. This guy's played a total of 29 games in his career, so 14.5 games per season, which is, I think, the highest out of the 3. Going into his rushing, 11.8 attempts per game. That is, for me, between 11 and 12, this is the better half of the backfield committee. And coming into the yards, 1,600 is very good, especially since he placed standard RB 37, I think it was. So this is probably majority just last season, I would assume. But 4.8 yards per attempt is very good. That's almost 5. And at 57 yards per game, this is better than RB1 that we have, the contestant 1, I mean. 57 yards per game is very good. 10 touchdowns gets him about 0.34 per game. That's going to be 1 in every 3 games to get you a touchdown. So not as much of a touchdown rate as contestant 1. And then the breakoff runs, he has 8, which is 2% of attempts as well. So tied with contestant 1. And then his receiving is not as good as contestant 1. This guy is more of a all-around back. He does better on the rushing, but not as good as receiving as RB1. The catches is 3 per game. Decent clip, decent yards per catch. 18.8 yards per game in the air is not the greatest if you're in a PPR league. That's almost 20 yards per game. Attached with the running, I think this guy's less yards per game than RB1, the contestant one, I mean. And then his touchdowns, he's only had 1 in the air, which is pitiful. Basically 1%, 1 out of every 100 catches. If he continues the rate that he's on, is going to be a touchdown. And then his big playability in the air, he's had 5. So more rushes, went for big yards and catches, which is 6% of his catches. And then coming in the contestant 3 here with 78 games over 6 seasons. This is going to be the lowest out of the 3 with 13 games played per season. And then the rushing is, he almost has 1,000 rushing attempts, which is, 11.8 attempts per game. This is right around where contestant 2 was. This is going to be the lowest yard per attempt per the 3 running backs on our list. But he almost hits a 50% clip per game. The touchdown per game is the highest, and his attempts that turn into 20-plus yard runs are the highest. And then going to the receiving side, he has the worst catch per game, but the highest catch per yards per catch, But he only has 21 yards per game. So contestant 1 is blowing these guys out of the water as far as the yards per game out of the receiving and the catches and everything. But this guy has 8 touchdowns over his career, which is a 4% rate. And then 7, that should be just 7 20-plus yard catches, not 7.7. But that is almost a 6% clip. So he has decent breakout potential on the pass. So just kind of going over the 20 yards over. The only one that has more catches and rushes for big yards is contestant 1. The other 2 are more of the all-around. And contestant 1 seems to be a really good satellite running back. His receiving is what makes him break out. Middle guy is the best of both worlds, and then this guy seems to be like on the ground, touchdown dependent almost, if you will. And then this is going to be their last year stats. So contestant 1 finished standard RB23 and PPR RB21 last year with 14 games played. The attempts per game here is horrific with 99 attempts. That puts him at RB43. 542 yards put him at RB37. 5 touchdowns put him at RB20 tie. And then his fantasy points per game throws him right around exactly where he finished, right in between actually at RB22. But his targets is where this guy shines when he does play. 70 targets, so 5 targets per game. That throws him at RB10. 48 catches throws him at RB12. Caught 68% of his targets. Yards, 389, puts him at RB11 last year with 8.1 yards per catch. And then 3 touchdowns in the air last year puts him at an RB7 tie. So 8 total touchdowns from this guy. Close to 1,000 yards. Then, what do you want to say? $150 total attempts and catches. So, this guy didn't get a lot of touches last year. 7 attempts per game is almost like didn't even play. This is like third-string running back depth chart type of attempts per game. And he still finished PPR RB21 and standard RB23. So, if this contestant right here gets the attempts that he demands, especially with a 5.47 yards per carry, that is insane. That's almost every 2 rushes is going to be a first down. I don't know what team wouldn't want that in their backfield. You'll know whenever you see him who didn't want him. But, this guy, when he does touch the ball, he's one of the better backs in the league. And, this guy just hasn't had the opportunity to showcase what he's really been, at least in my opinion. Contestant 2 is the best finished out of all last year with standard 14 and PPR 7. And this is also the only running back that finished a full season last year. So please take that into account with his touches and targets. For attempts with 210, that puts him at RB17 tie. He eclipsed 1,000 yards, puts him at RB12. The 5 touchdowns on the ground time with contestant 1 at RB20. And then the fantasy points per game sets at 10.6, which would have put him at RB17. So this running back really got PPR 7 just because he played a full season. Excuse me. If this guy's setting with 13, 14 games like the other 2, he's going to not be as high. But if you play a full season, that helps so much. That just That's 3 or 4 games extra points. And then the receiving side of things, this guy shined last year at the receiving. RB2 in targets, RB4 in catches, RB7 in yards, and then again the touchdowns is where this guy lacks in the receiving game. With the one, this is his only career touchdown out of the 2 seasons he's played, which ties him at RB20. But if you look at the rest of the receiving stats, they are immaculate. I mean, he's within the top 10 of running backs in all 3 stats. 6.1 yards per catch, catches at an 80% clip, and gets 5 targets per game. That is a satellite back if I ever saw one. So this guy really stepped up last year, his receiving game in total. He's just got to get them touchdowns in the air up or get more touchdowns on the ground, because 6 touchdowns in total that's like middle of the pack, lower middle. And he still finished PPR 7. So if he gets some touchdowns up, that could counteract the fantasy points per game for me and set him right around RB10 for me at least. He's going to be in the top 10 to 12 draft picks for sure as far as running backs go. And then contestant 3 here went for standard RB20 and PPR RB19. He played 13 games last year, so this is going to be the least amount out of all 3 of these contestants. But he had 14 attempts per game, which is huge. 183 total attempts put him at RB28. Yards, the only one to crack 1,000 is contestant 2, which was the blue one. But this guy has 782 yards, which puts him at RB30. 7 touchdowns. I mean, he is the most touchdowns out of the 3, which ties him at RB14. And this guy also has the most fantasy points per game with 11.9. If he would have played all 17, this would have thrown him at RB11. So this guy's stats, fantasy points per game wise, what is higher than what he finished. That's due to the lack of the 4 games played. So that's crucial when determining who you want to go with next year. If you're looking at an injury-prone running back, like 2 of these 3 have been last year, I mean, you got to assume the risk with the reward. Because if he would have played a full season, that's a RB1. At least it's finished, of course. And then going in the receiving, this guy does pretty good receiving himself. He can carry himself with the other 2 running backs here. 58 targets, puts him at RB12 tie. Caught the best clip, 79%. 46 catches put him at RB13 tie. So the 300 yards makes him a clipped over 1,000 total yards for this guy. But the 300 yards receiving puts him at RB17. And the 1 touchdown in the air ties him with contestant 2 around the RB20. So this guy, out of fantasy points per game, has the best overall at RB11. But going over it, I think RB1 is the best receiving running back out of the. Granted, that contestant 2 had the best receiving season last year, but over the course of their career, contestant 1 has played 1 more season and it has way better receiving stats over his career than RB1 or RB2. But, I mean, if that breakout season last year for contestant 2 was really what it was supposed to be and really is like what it is on paper, then I could definitely see him surpassing contestant 1 in receiving. The contestant 2 seemed to be the most overall dominant, with over the only one having over 1,000 yards rushing. And RB2 for this list also had the best receiving season last year, which is a breakout season for him, which he placed top 10 in almost every single receiving category. And then this guy had the best fantasy points per game and the most touchdowns, I believe, out of the 3. So each one of these guys has their own, repertoire and what they bring, their strengths to the table. But going into who they are, the red was DeAndre Swift, which is going at an ADP of RB23. Ramondre Stevenson is the one to look at here with an ADP of RB12. And then James Conner was the yellow with an ADP of RB25. So taking the stats for what they were, I didn't think Ramondre Stevenson should go over 10 ADPs above these 2. I think he should fall back a few spaces. But, I mean, like I said before in the last series, or last episode, stats don't tell the whole story. The reason Ramondre Stevenson didn't have a great rookie year is because that Damian Harris and everything in the backfield of New England. So he's the backside of that. And then DeAndre Swift is with ADP RB23. Yes, that's kind of where he was supposed to finish last year, but he only had 9 attempts per game on the ground. I mean, if you're rushing for 5.5 yards per carry, I don't know how you only touch the ball 9 times. And if you really watched football last year and you watched Detroit Lions, yes, he played 13, 14 games, whatever it was, But for half of those, he only saw the field like 30%. Like he did not get the touches that he deserves. When this guy's on the field, I think he's better than both of these running backs. That's just me personally. But the stats, I mean, the receiving stats show it. But I mean, the statistical fantasy points per game didn't. And then James Conner, a lot of people like him. I really like him. I'll try to draft him when I can. But going at RB25 is a little low for me. Granted that he's going to be basically the only offensive person in Arizona this year with any type of consistency under his belt. Kyler Murray is going to be coming back off that ferocious injury. DeAndre Hopkins is, I think, still attempting a trade. And then, I mean, that's basically all they have. I don't know who else they have on their offense. So just looking at this, Ramondre Stevenson's very good. But I like Swift for the price. Giving the prices under these players, me personally, I know I'm a Philly fan, and it's going to sound like a biased pick, but I like DeAndre Swift if he stays healthy at that ADP, way more than Ramondre Stevenson at his. I think you could get a much better wide receiver at Ramondre Stevenson because the wide receivers, there's going to be a tier break for sure. So at RB12, that's going to be the equivalent of picking up like a Chris Olave or a Garrett Wilson as a wide receiver, and then sticking DeAndre Swift or James Conner in your RB1, RB2 slot. I would sign me up for that for sure. I'd rather have Chris Olave anyway over Ramondre Stevenson. If that gives me DeAndre Swift a round or two, maybe even 3 to 4 rounds later, depending on how much your league mates are terrified of the injury bug. Yeah, so that does it for this episode. My name's Shan Holtz, and on No Face, No Case, we don't judge the players by the names, but by the stats they produce.